Hello, everyone. This is Lexicon Architect coming at you with another budget commander list. And this time, I promise, is a lot cheaper than the last few decks that I did for the channel. Um, the price range I will talk about at the end of the video. But let's start. So, this deck is Vraan Aristocrats. And this was inspired by one of my friends named June, and they offered me this commander to build, and I play tested against them once, and I think it's very good. Um, it does take a while to get set up, but we have a lot of really neat and fun cards in this deck to play. So first of all, let's get into the commander. We have Vraan, Executioner of Thane. She is a 2-mana spell that says whenever one or more creatures you control dies, each opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. And this ability triggers only once per turn. So the interesting thing about this is that we have several creatures that have abilities to recur themselves from the graveyard. So we always have constant sack fodder to drain our opponents and draw a couple cards every time we use one of our instants that has an ability like that. So let's get into the creature base. First, we have our Yara. So whenever another black creature enters the battlefield, we gain each opponent loses a life, you gain a life. Then we can also sacrifice a black creature to draw a card. We have Blood Artisan here as an aristocrat ability to whenever it or another creature dies, target player loses a life, you gain a life. Blood Gas, while it's very expensive in paper, it is dirt cheap on Moto. It's a 2-mana spell that cannot block, and it has haste if an opponent has 10 or less life, but it has a cool ability called Landfall, which states basically whenever a land ETB is under your control, you can return it from your graveyard to the battlefield. Next, we have Blood-Soaked Champion. It's a 1-mana can't block, and it has Raid, so this is one of the recurable creatures that we can bring back for 2 mana as long as we have attacked with a creature this turn. We are playing Braids because we are constantly sacking creatures. So at the beginning of our end step, if we do sack a creature, land, planeswalker, enchantment, if we do, each opponent may sacrifice a permanent that shares a card type with it. And for each opponent that doesn't, that player loses 2 life and you draw a card. Carrion Feeder is a solid 1-drop, 1/1 that we can sack another creature to put a 1/1 counter on it. Constrip enters the battlefield tap. It's a 2/1 for 1, which for 2 mana you can return it to the battlefield as long as a non-skeleton creature died under your control. That's familiar just in here because when it dies, each opponent will lose 2 life. You gain 2 life. We play Fellstinger because it's a 3/2 for 3 with Death Touch and Exploit. So if we do exploit a creature, we can draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Or if our opponent is at 2 or less life, we can force them to draw, and then they can lose 2 life, and then you can win the game in that way. We are playing Gixian Puppeteer. So whenever we draw our second card each turn, each opponent loses 2 life and gain a life. 2 life, sorry, and then when it dies, you may return another creature with 3 mana value 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Gravecrawler is a 1-drop that cannot block, but we can cast it from our graveyard as long as we control a zombie. So this can recur itself and be a sack outlet for us. We are playing Gray, Merchant of the Fossil. It is a 5-mana spell, but it is very good in a pod where you have 3 other players because each opponent will lose X life. You will gain a ton of life off of this as well based on your devotion to black. Gutter Bones is a 1-drop that ETBs tap, but we can return it from the graveyard to your hand and we can only activate this ability if an opponent lost life this turn. We are playing Jadar as a 2-mana 1/1 that at the beginning of our end step, if we control no creatures with Decayed, we will create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, which we can use to sacrifice for our commander to ping damage, gain life, draw cards, whatever it may be. Rampart of the Death Vigil is a 2-mana 1/3 with pay 1 mana to sacrifice a creature, and each opponent will lose a life, you gain a life. We play Midnight Reaper for card draw. It's a 3 mana for 3/2, and whenever a non-token creature controls dies, we will lose a life and we will draw a card. Then we also play Morbid Opportunist, a 3 mana 1/3 that says whenever one or more creatures die, draw a card, but this ability only triggers once per turn. We have Nether Trader. It is a 2 mana haste with Shadow, and it says whenever another creature is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay 1. If you do, we can return this. So this is another recurable creature for us. We're playing a Fearmancer because at the beginning of each upkeep, if you control no snakes, you can put a 1/1 black snake creature token with Death Touch on the battlefield, and having a Death Touch creature is always good. So we can block with the Death Touch or attack with the Death Touch, and force our opponent to make a decision whether they want to block or they might be wary to attack into us with this on board. We are playing Persistent Specimen. It is a 1 mana 1/1, and we can return it to the battlefield for 3. We also play Phyrexian Vivisector. So whenever another one of our creatures dies, we can scry 1. So we can scry away cards that we don't need, most likely lands, or any other card we feel that we don't need at the present moment. Priest of the Forgotten Gods is one of my favorite cards in the game. 2 mana 1/2 that we can sack two other creatures, and then any number of target players each lose 2 life and sacrifice a creature, and then we will also add double black to our mana pool and draw a card. We are playing Reassembling Skeleton as another recurable creature that we can return from the graveyard to the battlefield. We're playing Scornblade Berserker. It has backup, so we can put a counter on another creature, and then that creature also gains the ability of this creature, where we can pay 1 to sacrifice this creature to draw a card. Serrated Scorpion, because whenever it dies, each opponent will lose 2 life, you will gain 2 life. Shambling Gas is a solid 1-drop 1/1 that when it dies, we can either give another target creature -1/-1, or we can create a treasure token. And then we have Vermin Gorger, which is another sack outlet for us, so we can sacrifice another creature. Each opponent will lose 2 life, you gain 2 life, and it works well with the commander, so we will drain everyone for 4 and then gain 4. Viscera Seer is in here to sacrifice another creature to scry, and then we are also playing Vito Thorn of the Dusk Rose to drain our opponents whenever we gain life, and then a target opponent will lose that much life. And then for whatever case, if we do pay 5, our creatures will gain lifelink until the end of the turn. And then we have Zulaport Cutthroat as another aristocrat creature that whenever it or another creature dies, each opponent will lose a life and you gain a life. As far as sorceries, we're playing Annihilating Glare. It will only cost us 1 mana because we're going to be sacrificing a creature and artifact anyway. We can destroy target creature or planeswalker for 1. Same with Bone Shards. All we have to do is sacrifice this or discard a card to destroy a target creature or planeswalker. Then we have 3 cards to draw. We have Night's Whisper, Read the Bones to scry 2, draw 2 cards, lose 2 life. Sign in Blood to draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. And like I said, this kind of works in the same way as our Exploit creature. So we can sometimes just end the game by playing this card and targeting an opponent that only has 2 life left. And then for instance, we are playing a bunch of cards that draw us cards. So the Reap will draw us 2, Costly Plunder will draw us 2, Dark Ritual to ramp, Deadly Dispute to Sacrifice a creature, draw 2, create a treasure, Defile for removal, Go for the Throat for removal, Infernal Grasp for removal, Merciless Resolve to draw cards, Plumb the Forbidden to draw cards, Reckoning's Bargain to generate a bunch of 2/2 black zombie creature tokens for the number of non-token creatures that die this turn. We can foretell it for 2 and then pay it for 1. We are also playing Rotten Reunion, so we can exile a card from a graveyard. It doesn't have to be our own. We'll make a 2/2 zombie creature token with Decayed, and then we can flash this back for 2. Shoulder's Edict is good, especially because since we're playing with multiple creatures, each opponent will have to do either one of these, so they can either sacrifice a non-token creature, sacrifice a creature token, or they will have to sacrifice a planeswalker. Tragic Slip is for removal, because most of the time we will have a creature that's dying, and for 1 mana we can give a creature -13/-13, and Village Rites is also another card, another instant spell to draw us 2 as long as we sacrifice a creature. And then for the mana base, for the mana rocks, we're going to be playing Signet, Commander Sphere. We're going to play one of my favorite cards called Crowded Crypt, so it is a mana rock for us. And then whenever another creature token we control dies, whenever another creature we control dies, we put a corpse counter on it, and then for 6, we can sacrifice this artifact to generate a bunch of 2/2 black zombie creature tokens with Decayed. We are playing Genesis Chamber, so whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield, if it's untapped, its creature's controller creates a Myr. Skull Clamp is in here to help us draw cards. Transmogrant Crown is also to draw cards. Vat of Rebirth is a solid 1-drop artifact that whenever an artifact or creature is put in the graveyard, we put an oil counter on it. And then if we do have 4 or more oil counters on it, we can pay 3 to return a target creature from the graveyard to the battlefield. Wilch's Cauldron is another sack outlet for us. It is a 1 mana, and then for 2 mana we can sack a creature to gain a life and draw a card. And finally, we play Witch's Oven. We can sacrifice a creature, and if we do, we create a food token. And if that creature's toughness was 4 or greater, we will create 2 foods. We are only running 2 enchantments. We're going to be playing Bastion of Remembrance to create a token, and then whenever one of our creatures dies, each opponent loses their life, you gain a life. And then finally, Ghoulish Possession. Whenever one or more non-token creature dies, create a 2/2 black zombie creature token with Decayed, and this only triggers once per turn. And then finally, we have 35 Swamps. So we have a solid mana curve. We have a lot of 1-drop spells and a lot of 2, not many 3, and we have very few 4 or 5. And like I said, this deck is a lot cheaper than the normal ones. It will run you somewhere between $100 to $105, depending on where you get your cards. So I hope you enjoyed this deck tech video. It will be up on YouTube shortly, and Patreon, as well as Tumblr, where you have access to all of my social media links. So if you like the deck, please subscribe to me on YouTube, and I hope you have a great and wonderful day.